You're listening to Enjoy It While It Lasts, and I'm your host, Herman Faust. Today's deep dive: my skeptical path from Christianity to agnosticism. I was raised Christian. My mother prays a lot and always had. So she's always encouraged us to pray as well before eating and before bed. Before eating was pretty much procedural, but before bed, it was kind of ingrained in me that that was my time to have a conversation with God, make sure that I thanked Him for everything, made whatever requests I was going to make, and basically just got whatever I needed to off my chest. We didn't go to church all the time for at least the entirety of my childhood, but I do remember there were several years where we did go to church, and I do remember my mom trying to teach me biblical stories other times as well, and tried to, at a couple of different times, encourage me and get me to actually read the Bible on my own. But of course, that didn't really stick until I got a little bit older and could actually read well enough to get through trying to read the Bible. But it was mainly those just different biblical stories is the way that I was taught early on. The main story that I remember as far as a story that stuck with me as with the meaning of it, I mean, sticking with me, not just the actual story itself. Because, of course, I remember all the, there's the David and Goliath, there's the Noah's Ark, there's, of course, the story of Adam and Eve, there's all the pretty much all the popular biblical stories. I was taught, including, the sacrifices, the destruction of cities, all of it, but as individual stories. But the one that morally stuck with me the most was about Christians being fed to lions, and how they were given the opportunity to denounce Christianity and survive. However, they stayed faithful and was put in the lion's den. I think the actual singular story was about Daniel surviving the lion's den. But I remember it being taught to me as also a historical context that, hey, this is a thing that people used to do. They used to kill Christians in certain places in certain times in history. But that the lesson is that you never, even in a situation like that, you should never denounce Christ, because the price you would pay would be far worse than whatever we have here on earth. That you would be, of course, sentenced to an eternity in hell if you pushed Christ out of your heart in order to save your life. And so as a kid, it was always very clear to me that it was just like a no-brainer decision. Of course, you would take whatever punishment, whatever death, whatever torture a person was going to give you, and you would never even think about saying that you're not a Christian. But the reason being, the motivation was not because you were proving your love per se. It was more of a loyalty test and fear that, well, whatever consequence I'm about to face, hell is going to be way, way worse of a consequence. So it was more a choosing the lesser of two consequences for yourself, as opposed to just like truly being uplifted by faith. But whatever the motivation, the lesson was still obviously clear to me that your faith will be tested, and to pass the test to get to heaven is basically you have to stay true to it. It, again, a loyalty test is what faith was felt like, even though I didn't necessarily have the words at the time or look at it that way at the time. That is how it felt. And if you were loyal enough, you would not only not face these worst consequences, but you would be rewarded, that heaven was this ultimate reward, a place where things can finally be peaceful and be fair, and you can just exist in happiness. So again, it created this no-brainer type thinking for a kid of, well, you have like this ultimate punishment versus the ultimate reward. So why would you not stay on the path? Why would you ever question anything about the road in front of you, or the scripture, or what we're telling you to do that God wants you to do? Because if you just follow along, you're going to get to the top of the mountain and have experiences that you could never imagine how great they could be. And you'll basically live forever. You'll go on as part of eternity and be one with God and feel eternally bliss. Or you can eternally suffer. What a stupid person to choose to not simply just follow the path that God sets out. I'm not saying that the relationship aspect with religion, or that having a relationship with God was not part of the whole religion that I was taught as well. But it was definitely, at least in my brain, it was secondary. And logically, it had to be. It, of course, was secondary because the reward and consequences were so impactful. Now, like I said, the relationship aspect was there. And I started this by mentioning that I would end every night by praying and having my conversation with God. In those times, and also the times whenever we did go to church, I do remember having a feeling of place, I guess, feeling of fullness. It is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you are telling a kid, "Hey, you're speaking to God right now," and of course, as a kid, I fully believe it. So of course, it's gonna make me feel like it's a special thing, make me feel good. I don't think that's. I think some people would say that's proof of their personal proof of God's existence. I think now, as an adult, I think it's, of course you're going to feel it. I think it's just obvious. It's just psychological impact on what you're expecting to feel, and so what it makes you feel. I do want to talk about my time whenever we were as part of a church and whenever I was a kid, because part of this episode, and honestly part of every religious conversation I end up having, I always have to make sure that I differentiate the religion and the organization, that churches and the beliefs are different things. I feel very differently about most churches, at least, than I do about religion. And that started for me, like as a teenager, for sure, like where it really solidified. But it also, even as my faith has changed throughout the years, I can have a lot more. I do have a lot more respect for religions than I do for most organizations, most churches. I say most. Of course, I leave room for exceptions, and I acknowledge there are lots of good churches out there that actually do try to be accepting and follow the teachings. But again, most of what I've seen, that is not the case. For my time, in my personal experience in church from as a kid, it was actually pretty positive for the most part. I remember liking Sunday school. We went to a couple of vacation Bible study camps, and they were always fairly positive experiences. I remember not necessarily like loving them. It's not like I was excited about it, but I didn't hate it either. It was something to do. But the church experience itself, I always enjoyed. I thought it was, I guess, fun to the whole singing, the whole taking the ritual of eating the body of Christ and drinking the blood of Christ. It just felt fulfilling to me because of the ritual aspect. And I did feel like it was a place of community because at the church we went to, we at least were also participants in several of the different potluck dinners they would have. And there was even a time where the church got together and painted my grandmother's house, which is where we were living. We were all living at the time. Um, and I remember the day of everybody coming over and everybody, doing this work on the house for free. So I had a good first impression. I had good positive feelings about the people in the church and about just the idea of church itself. I do remember there was one time where we tried to have like I don't know, a play date, a hangout time with, it was me and my brother and my mom, with one other family, one other mother and her one or two kids, I don't remember. And we went to like a playground together, a park nearby. And I remember that experience being very awkward. I don't think that we naturally got along, us kids, but we also had this pressure of, we were looking at it as we're part of the church. We have to, I don't know, we have to both play nice and be trying to be friends with each other, whether we want to or not. And also at the same time, there's that pressure of, I didn't want to be judged. I had to felt like I had to hide the worst of me, the different parts of me, and I almost kept myself on church behavior, even though we were at a playground. Now that was probably just 100% me, my own internal discomfort from being unsure, and probably had nothing to do with them as people. They probably were not judging us in any way, and I just felt uncomfortable. Uh, I think for me, the reason it started, I do remember this now that I'm talking about it. I remember they played Christian music in the car, and while we did, of course, go to church, that was very odd for us as a family. So I think that kind of got me off thinking that, oh, these are some of the good people. We don't want to let them see how bad we are. As time went by, for no particular reason, we've kind of fell off going to church. My beliefs didn't really change at all, of course. I still was very strong as a preteen, as a teenager, as far as believing. I would pray even as a teenager from time to time. I admittedly prayed less. It wasn't top of mind anymore, but it was something that I still, it's what I still considered myself a Christian because I held the beliefs. One example of the way that I presented my faith is I wouldn't say God damn. I wouldn't say any cursing, or I wouldn't say Jesus Christ as an exclamation. I followed the rule of not taking the Lord's name in vain in that way. Despite cussing a ton and saying mean shit to people at times, I at least would have my line there. I had a friend whose parents were also very religious, and he himself went to church a lot in his youth. So, and we would spend a lot of time talking about the Bible and just talking about God in general. And I also started going back to church around, I don't know, 15 or 16 years old. Um, and this is a time period that started for me of me going regularly again to one church, but also trying out different churches as well. This is where it really formed for me my opinion of what I viewed as the typical churchgoer. This is where I started to see lots of gossip and felt like there was lots of judgment coming from pretty much everybody inside the church. I also felt like it was just very clicky, very groups formed, groups of friends within the church as opposed to the whole church being a community. And I felt that at the churches I visited as well as the church that I went to regularly. I really loved the pastor at the church I went to, and whenever I got married as an adult, as a young adult, he was the one I went back to and asked and got him to marry me and my wife. But the people, the churchgoers, made me feel like I was out of place there. Made me feel like you were always there to be seen, not necessarily to praise. Since I experienced this at many churches within a couple year period, and also felt like that's the same feedback I got from other people who went to church as well, it really solidified in my mind the idea that people don't necessarily go to church and then instantly absorb and actually follow through with intentions. It felt like church was almost a checklist thing for a large group of people, or a way to substitute that, like saying they go to church instead of actually living and following through with what you're supposed to believe in, what Jesus Christ taught. At this point, I was still very religious, but I became anti-church. Also, around this time, of course, as you're learning more and more history, and just realizing overall, even current day in the news, in the world, just all of the things that are done in the name of God that just completely defies what the Bible taught me that God wanted us to do. It seemed like the Bible and other religions were used as nothing more than excuses for violence. And I just saw the church as the church overall as a controlling organization that was corrupt and sought power and money. And I looked at the concept of the organization of churches and organized religion overall as the antithesis of what it's supposed to be. It felt very much like the biblical stories of Satan trying to trick you into thinking you were doing good and following God, but really the whole time you're causing harm to people instead of helping people. For me, a very basic test was, if you could go into a church with your worst clothes on, would the people there accept you and invite you in, or would they look down at you for not dressing up? I had this same type of thought whenever my wife and I later in life tried to restart going to church. She liked the idea of it and wanted it to be something we did as a family, especially once we got our kids. And so we tried going to different churches, and I had the same feelings, the same experiences of that these churches were not not following what the Bible teaches, and I sometimes would disagree with the interpretations, but more than that, just over the overall feel of the church. Um, Luckily for me, my wife never found one that she connected with either, so that kind of fell away for us. And since then, I have pretty much been able to successfully avoid having to reintegrate myself in any churches, especially now, seeing as I'm a complete non believer, which is, I think, what I need to address next. How did I get from being somebody that fully believed in Jesus Christ, even after I stopped believing in the church, to now just being fully a non-believer? I'm basically, I guess, giving you the anti-testimonial, the opposite of what any pastor would invite somebody up to say. My first time doubting Christianity was whenever I started having the thoughts that if you're going to believe, you can't pick and choose what you believe. It starts there. within, if you're going to believe the Bible, let's say, you can't say, well, I believe these parts of the Bible, but these parts of the Bible are made up. It felt very, if you could do that, it felt very counterintuitive to me to then just say like, well, how do you, what's the line? How do you decipher? How do you decide? I've since, of course, not looked at it as hard lined as that, and I do realize there can still be more nuance by applying logic to faith and somehow finding a way to maintain both. However, at the time, that this was my starting point that led me here, and the biggest contention I had was the idea that the only way to salvation was through Jesus, was through accepting Christ as your Savior. This really stuck wrong with me. It made it seem like it was just a matter of chance whether or not you could go to hell or not, because what if you were simply born into a family that was a different religion? And sure, later you could learn about Christianity, but just because you learned about it later on, most people tend to stick with the beliefs that they were raised with. So if a person grew up Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or whatever religion that they were raised as, it made no sense to me that if they did everything within following their own religion's rules, or just even what a Christian would say, lived a morally good life, that person would then be punished, especially considering how extreme we've already said that the punishments were, by just following their beliefs. It seemed wrong that the test ended up not being a moral test, but a test of, did you guess the right religion? Did you choose the right one? Especially when it's all faith-based. The whole point of it is there's no evidence. And so I tried to reconcile this. I asked many preachers and priests and wanted somebody to help me find a way to maintain my faith in Christianity, but find a way to fix this hole in logic, to me at least. But nobody ever gave me a good answer. I never got any answer. In fact, it was pretty much always boiled down to, you just have to have faith, which did not at all satisfy the actual question that I was asking. I also started to question what it meant, what sin meant itself, and why we're considered sinners simply for being alive. Why did it seem that people would be punished and condemned just because of things that they were born to have? Sexuality was a big one for me, because I've always felt that people are attracted to who they're attracted to and can't necessarily help it. And even in the way it was explained to me, at least by different people, it was almost as if that was their test. That was that if you were born as a gay person, that your test was to see if you could love God more than you love sin, and force yourself to be somebody you're not. And that didn't seem right to me, and I never found any explanation actually that set right to me that could explain just the general idea, not just of homosexuality being a sin, but just the idea of being born with sin. It felt like you're being automatically punished for something that's completely out of your control. It also just didn't feel, it felt very contradictory, the portrayal of God, because at times God was this loving, all accepting, all caring divine being, and at other times God just came across to me as petty and vengeful and ruling by fear. So I didn't really know how to make that work in my head, but I tried. I still wanted to believe. It felt right to me, probably just simply because that's the way that I was raised. It felt wrong that I was even questioning it, but I mean, my logical side, it brought up too many questions for me to just ignore. I go back to the story of the Christians being fed to the lions, and the idea, it then became obvious to me why it was a test. Because before, like I said, it felt like a no-brainer that no matter what you're being threatened with, of course, you don't deny Jesus, because you're just dumb. Like, again, you already know what's it's going to happen to you is going to be worse. But once I'm actually started questioning it myself, it became an actual question, I guess, of what would I do? It Would I be willing to face death over something that I am not sure about anymore? But what really ended up kind of bringing down the whole house of cards for me was in college, but surprisingly not philosophy. It was a history class. It was about how we were talking about how the Spanish were able to trick indigenous people by showing off their guns and their wealth and acting as if they were gods or sent by gods. And in the class, I remember the professor talking about it as if, not saying that all of the indigenous people were fooled, but talking about it as if the story was so ridiculous that he can't believe that any of the indigenous people were fooled. But as he went on to tell the story that Cortez, I think it was, ended up telling the Aztecs at the time, I remember thinking that it sounded a lot similar to the idea of Christianity, of God coming down in a human body. And I remember just thinking that, yeah, I agree that it's weird that these people anybody would fall for this lie, but what's the difference between this and this lie? And once that clicked in my head, it kind of just clicked permanently. And it really solidified that my religion, I should look at it with the exact same scrutiny that I look at any religion. And once I did that, it fell apart, logically, I mean. Suddenly, all of the inconsistencies, I couldn't alibi for them anymore. And on top of that, just I could explain different parts that before felt right. I could explain them without faith. The example that I talked about earlier of being a kid feeling like you're talking to God and then having that internal feeling, it made sense to me. Of course, I had that internal feeling with or without an outside force giving it to me. Another big part of it for me was the idea that whenever they say things happen for a reason or there's God's plan, or whenever somebody would try to say they know that God exists because he helped them through this time or that time, or the different miracles that people would describe, I would always counter that with, okay, but what about for the person that did not have your same luck? What about for the kid that was born into an abusive household and was beaten to death as a child that never really got to experience their miracle? Did God just not care about them? It didn't make sense to me that if there is a God, the amount of cruelty and the extremeness of the cruelty, if there is a God and that God would interfere in our earth, there would not be that level of life lived where they just was nothing but suffering. It didn't make sense to me that medical advancement or a miracle would help me because God's choosing to bless me, but then somebody else with a similar disease or a similar type of sickness would progress and just completely fall through until they died. Why was I chose to be blessed but not that person? It made no sense to me, the cruelty that could exist while still giving credit to God for the positive side of life. So it was at that point that I decided that for me, Christianity just was not a fit. There, as I looked at others, there was just no actual organized religion that I felt was a fit for me. I didn't believe. It just didn't logically. I needed something to logically fit. But I also didn't believe that there was no God. I did believe that there was a creator. Surprisingly, like I mentioned a second ago, not only did philosophy it was not the class that made me question my faith. It actually was the class that helped me kind of reaffirm the fact that I do believe in God with the watchmaker argument. The idea that if you stumbled onto a watch, this clock that was the most complex, most beautiful piece of machinery that you could find, just because you didn't see the person making it, somebody obviously made it. And that makes sense to me with the universe. There's too many like things that have to go together to make life work. It did feel like there was some design behind the science. It felt like there is a creator of the universe. I just didn't see any evidence that the creator, that God, was actually still being hands-on. It felt to me like God created the universe and then decided to let it play out. And that also works logically for me because it seems like there's no way to let something as complex as life exist without having the extremes of the ugly side exist as well. But you couldn't really eliminate pain and cruelty while still letting the universe be what it is. It would be exerting too much control and taking away too much chance. And chance is a big part of what makes everything work. It's on scale is why the universe and life works the way it does. Now, while I don't believe that God is actively interfering in the world and changing our lives, like I said, I do believe there is a God. I think there's too much to be coincidence. I think there's too much beauty as to go along with the ugly. I think that there is just too much symmetry, too much perfection within the imperfect world, and perfection in the way that things fit, in the way that science works to make the universe follow logical laws. So I do think that whether God is the universe itself or an external being creating the universe, that God is either bound by logic or is a form of logic itself, a form of rules. Maybe that's all the universe and God is just rules and math and logic. Maybe that's why, as we learn more and discover more, we gain more power over the universe and over our lives and change the world more because we're understanding the rules and understanding God more. Or maybe not. Maybe everything I just said is full of shit. I strongly stand by the fact that I don't know anything. I don't think that anybody should claim to know anything about the world because it's impossible. And I think anytime that somebody comes across as certain, I automatically look at them with extreme skepticism. So I don't ever want to portray myself as being certain that I'm right in my beliefs or ever sure of myself in any way, honestly, because I'm not. I also do think there is more to the world than what we see. I believe in energies, and I think that's backed up with Something that is understandable to us currently is just waves, whether it be sound waves or radio waves, seismic waves. I think we can understand the idea, if we look at it that way, the same way we look at those things, and the same way we look at energy, physical energy. I think that maybe one day we might even be able to fully discover and experience and explain in better words than I have today what I mean by I think there's more than just what meets the eye. I do believe in karma to an extent. I don't necessarily think that there is like some scorekeeper that if you do good, good will come to good will come to you. But I do think that if the more people put good out, the more good that is done, there just kind of is more good overall in the world, in the universe, and that's what makes it more likely to come back to you. And the reason it's more likely to come back to you personally, what you put out, is you're surrounding yourself not only with the energy you put out, but you tend to put out positive or negative energy based off of things that you're also doing for yourself. A person that tends to put out positive energy in the world also tends to have a more positive mindset overall. It's kind of like the idea of if you're looking for a yellow car, all of a sudden you see a bunch of yellow cars. If you're looking for the good, you're going to see the good. And if you're putting out bad and feeling bad all the time and just looking for the bad, you're going to notice all the bad. So I try to always be looking for the good and try to do good when I can. I am not perfect in doing that by any means, but I at least try to keep myself oriented in that direction. I also try to keep my kids oriented in that same direction of doing what good they can and finding the good in the world. And I try to do so with honesty and without forcing my beliefs on them. I've never once claimed to my children that I know things. In fact, anytime they ask me different questions about the world, I will tell them straightforwardly that if something is unknowable or not, but then I will follow up with telling them what I believe to be true. I give them that type of explanation, whether it be them looking for an explanation in the world, for an answer about ultimate truths, or even just opinions on what is right and wrong in certain situations. I try to have a conversation with them and talk them through whatever it is their question is. I never want them to think that I'm dodging their question, and I also never want them to think that I'm some ultimate authority that has all the answers either. My kids have been exposed to prayer and religion by having their time with their grandmothers. And also, of course, just conversations with other people out in the world. Whether it be because it's what feels right to them or because of the grandmother influence, they have decided, all three of my kids currently, at the ages that they all believe or choose to believe in God and believe in Christianity. They will ask me different questions and I'll answer them through the lens of, if you're going to believe in this religion, this is what this religion says happened here. I've also kind of gotten the idea through to them, a little bit at least, that some stories in the Bible, you could look at them, some people look at them as literal, and I've tried to tell them that some people look at them as stories that teach lessons, but not necessarily everything is word for word true. And my kids, especially my daughters, will come to me and we'll have different times of pretty long and deep questions about spirituality, about the world, about the meaning of life. And we can sit and talk about it for a while and still not come to an agreement at the end. And I love that. I love that they will tell me at the end of a conversation that they disagree with me. and that they still choose to believe this or that. But they also still trust me enough to continue to come to me for these types of conversations, even though they do know that we believe differently. Me handling my kids learning religion this way is part of me trying to follow through on my beliefs of putting out into the world what I want more of, and that's just intellectual honesty and conversations and openness and acceptance. Even though I'm not sure of pretty much anything, the closest that I can be to sure is about the one aspect of religion that is pretty universal to all religions, and that's the idea that we should just take care of each other. We should love each other. And I'm close to sure that if more of us do that, then the world does get better. Remember, unless you believe in reincarnation, you only have one life to live. You might as well enjoy it while it lasts.